delighted to
Hi
introduce you
there.
to my Coroners in Crime Fiction panel. And they're going to start off by introducing themselves, and we'll go in the order that I can see you on my screen. So if we start with Matthew, just because he's at the top.
Hi, I'm Matthew Hall. You may have read some of my books featuring coroner Jenny Cooper. There are 8 of those in that particular series, and they've been adapted for television, actually by a Canadian company. So the series is called Coroner, and you might catch that wherever you happen to be.
Nice. We'll go to Martin next.
Hi, my name's Martin Lee. I actually write under a pseudonym of, which is terribly original, called MJ Lee, which for some weird coincidence happens to be my initials. I write the D.I. Ridpath series of crime novels, which features a coroner's officer called Thomas Ridpath, and they're set in Manchester, in the coroner's offices in Manchester.
And Priscilla?
Hi there, I'm Priscilla Masters. I write 3 series, but the one that we're focusing on today features Martha Gunn, who is a coroner in the town of Shrewsbury, a very nice setting. I think there are 4 or 5 of them, maybe more than that, in the series. I mean, I just sort of plug in and get on with it. So I've lost count of many, but I think the last one was called Bridge of Sighs.
I'm really lucky with this panel. She said something like set up the whole festival, so I got to pick which panel I had because I've read multiple books by all of you. So I'm really excited. So I'm like basically sat here with like 3 authors whose books I really love. But before I start asking you my questions, of which I have loads, I'm going to ask you.
That's good.
I'm going to ask you some that Sheila Bugler asked before we went live. So Sheila is one of Martin's fellow authors at his publishers. And she's got some questions for you. So she said she loves your books, Martin, in particular. But I'm going to ask all of you this. What inspired you to write a series based in a coroner's office? Nice, easy start to begin with. And shall we keep going in the same order we did before? So I'll ask Matthew.
Yeah, short answer was that I started out life as a lawyer, as a criminal barrister. And so I'd seen a little bit of that world of coroners. And what interested me about them was that they have a very different objective to the other courts, criminal courts and civil courts. It's a competition between 2 sides, and the judge is a sort of umpire. But coroners have this duty to find out the truth, which is really unique in our system. And what's more than that, it is clear that some coroners take that duty far more seriously than others. You know, some of them do the minimum, and some of them I've met who've inspired me really go the extra yard and aren't afraid to upset people, ruffle feathers, ask difficult questions, upset the authorities, and even create diplomatic incidents in pursuit of the truth. So I thought that made them a good subject for writing. Yeah.
Martin?
I think Matthew's dead right. It's a coroner's office is a sort of a very strange adjunct of the judicial system in England, which has been around since, I think, Norman times. It's certainly 900 years old, at least. And as Matthew said, it's actually the one system which is non-adversarial. In other words, its sole point is how to find out the truth of any death. Always it focuses on deaths. I got involved with it, strange enough, because I was writing a short story about Shipman, a doctor who you may remember killed, nobody knows how many, up to 200 to 300 old people in Manchester. And then I sort of started doing research, went into the coroner's system and found out that most of these deaths have been reported to the coroner but never investigated. That led me into the sort of the the black hole, the rabbit hole of research, you know, as you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it suddenly opened up a wonderful way, I thought, of examining the world through the coronal system. And particularly, Matthew talks about the positive aspect, but there was also a pre-2009, the Coroners Act 2009, there was a massive failings in the coroner system where many deaths went unreported. And certainly Shipman literally got away with murder in Manchester because some coroners didn't even see any of his reports. So that's how I got involved in it, and then managed to realize that a coroner's officer has this wonderful role where he's does investigations on behalf of the coroner, liaises with families, liaises with the police, and in any death is the person who decides which how bodies are handled at a post-mortem and how in fact they're investigated. So my main character, coroner's officer called Thomas Ridpath, is actually seconded from Greater Manchester Police to work with the coroner, a woman called Mrs. Margaret Challoner. And she, again to Matthew's point, is an activist coroner who's actually out there trying to change and amend the mistakes that were made during the Shipman episode in Manchester.
Which speaks nicely onto Priscilla, because I feel like Martha's quite an activist coroner.
Well, I had two reasons, particularly for writing about a coroner. The first is that I'm married to a medic, and lots of medics in the family, and my background is nursing, so I have had brushes with the coroner's court. What interested me was that my 3 series characters would look at the same crime from a different angle with a different premise. So that's the first thing, is that the psychiatrist is trying to anticipate crime, trying to pick out the people who might be a problem to the general public in the future. Then we've got the police personnel who are looking into a crime that has happened. And then finally, you get the coroner's aspect, you know, where they have to know when, where, how and when. The other thing that really got to me, and it's happened in the last fortnight, is that they have a chance for social comment. Just to quickly run through things, they've been advocates for seatbelts. They've drawn attention to asbestosis and pneumoconiosis, the link between lung cancer, cigarettes, thalidomide. And then only in the last week, a coroner has done the first death due to that small girl because of air pollution. So their social comment, I think, is a really important part of the job.
Okay, so we've got some questions and comments rolling in. So Alex Hawley says hi. Sam says hi, and she knows me so well because she's our other member of the author chat thing. She says she loves my giddy face because I've got like so many authors I like. Joe says hi. He's in Kendal in Cumbria. Daphne says hi. Joe wants to know if you've all visited more than one coroner's court and if there's much difference between them.
Yes and yes. The first coroner I went to visit when I was doing my research, just a little over 10 years ago, was really old school. A kind of giant bullfrog of a man who sat there chain smoking in the office. And he took a couple of calls while I was there from consultants at the local hospital, and was busy sort of writing out death certificates. And I asked him about it, and he said, well, they're all friends of his and he trusted what they had to say implicitly, and then told me a few funny anecdotes about families who ran a chain of convenience stores and kept their elderly relatives in freezers out the back so they could continue to collect their pensions. So he was kind of like, he was old school. He had a good gallows sense of humor, but he's not the man I would have wanted to investigate something important. And then at the other end of the spectrum is a coroner who sort of inspired me really quite personally, called Andrew Walker, who's now a coroner in North London. But he was appointed a deputy assistant coroner back in the early 2000s, aged only 36. And he came to prominence when he did the inquest into a young British soldier called Matty Hull, who was driving a Land Rover in Iraq, which was hit by a missile fired by an American plane that overflew it and mistook the markings on the Land Rover roof. Andrew Walker wanted the American airman to appear in his court in Oxfordshire. That wasn't happening. The American Air Force wouldn't cooperate, the MOD wouldn't cooperate, but he dug his heels in for about four years. And finally a cockpit tape emerged which showed that there was a high degree of negligence, and a verdict of unlawful killing was returned. It didn't win him any friends at all, his search for the truth, and he's continued to be a bit of a thorn in the flesh of the authorities. And he's brave and goes the extra mile. So I think there's a big sweep of different temperaments in the coroner's office, but the government, there's always going to be a tension between coroners and the government, because they're always going to unearth things which are uncomfortable. I think that's inevitable. I think the governments have tried to sort of clip their wings a bit in recent years, using Shipman as a bit of a smokescreen, as a way of exerting greater control over them. But I hope that there are still some fiercely independent-minded ones among them.
Excellent, Martin.
Yeah, I agree, Matthew. Shipman was, there was an inquiry after Shipman by a woman called Lady Smith, I think, who actually wanted to revolutionise the coronial service. Unfortunately, the Labour government of the day, I think, Jackie Smith, I think was the name of the Home Secretary.
Home Secretary.
Yeah, Home Secretary. She didn't implement most of the findings, and instead basically appointed a chief coroner to overlook and handle, if you like, manage it for the government over England and Wales in 2009. Yeah. I actually visited coroners in Manchester and in Liverpool. And weirdly enough, before I visited them, was expecting something very more like Matthew found 10 years ago, old-fashioned and fuddy-duddy and very old school, and instead found very active, particularly Manchester young coroners who were committed to looking for the truth. And maybe the Shipman case had affected them in the sense of it encouraged them to push a little harder so that the same mistakes weren't made again. But I found them committed to looking after the truth. In fact, it was funny, one day I went to the coroner's office in South Manchester, and it was fascinating watching basically a social worker lie constantly to the coroner. She questioned him again and again and again, but in a non-adversarial way. It's not like the Crown Courts when you can actually officially say, are you telling the truth? She had to constantly ask him whether he understood what his own note was. And he kept saying, well, he couldn't remember. I'm sorry, I can't remember. So it was both a strength of the coroner system that she was actively seeking the truth rather than an adversarial relationship, but also a weakness in that they can be blocked by people who simply say, I can't remember why I did something. And so the coronal system still has strengths and weaknesses. But it was fascinating to see. I have a great respect for the work that people do, and wish that they had there were more active coroners than there are. They have great opportunity to investigate deaths.
Priscilla?
Yeah, I've attended a coroner's court in many times, actually, because my husband as a GP was frequently asked to contribute to the coroner's court. I mean, both cases were incredibly bizarre. I mean, the one was a very, very violent suicide, and the other one was a death in a care home that my husband knew full well what had happened. He knew that it was to do with some prescribing of tranquilizers of a patient and restraining. But he didn't want to say it. But as you say, a coroner can be many things, but the way they can tease out the truth, I think, is really quite admirable. It's not particularly adversarial, and we all know that they have no teeth, but they can direct police inquiries. I myself was involved then in a case that happened because it was in the hospital, and it was over the Christmas period, and I was the only person who had seen the same patient consistently. So all my notes were there, but the patient hadn't been seen by a doctor, and there was some conflict over the diagnosis. And so I myself was dragged in and asked to give evidence. I mean, and the other thing is that in this very violent suicide, the family were quite devout Catholics, and the thought of this person having committed suicide was so horrendous to them that actually the coroner let my husband give an opinion, and he said, well, I think it was as if he was possessed. And oddly enough, the family accepted that verdict from the doctor, and actually came out and hugged him and so on like that after the case, because the thought of suicide was so horrendous, and yet it was fairly obvious what it was.
Mm.
So sticking with the comments, we've got Gwyn GB. She says hello from Jersey.
Hello.
We're going worldwide as well, because we've got a hello further down from Hugo Charles in Norway.
Wow.
I know.
Hello.
It's amazing.
Hi, Hugo from Norway.
Yeah, I love seeing it when we get people on from all over the world in the group. It's really nice.
It's exciting.
My dad, he's coming up as David Gilchrist on here, who founded the group. He says good afternoon to you all.
Hello, David.
Hi.
Also, one of the reasons why I've read most of you, because he's an avid reader of UK crime fiction, and I think has started me off on reading all of your books at various points. So yeah, it's a good one. He's probably very interested in the panel. Samantha wants to know if it's difficult to decide where the balance is between making a scene interesting and overdoing the technical details. That's a good one.
I'm glad I'm third.
Yes, technical details are inherently boring and not dramatic, so you have to keep them to a minimum. That's just my rule of thumb, you know. A certain amount, but only in service of the story, and never get sidetracked by them, I think. You know, describing post-mortems, I was quite careful about that in the first book, not to go into too much detail, but yet having been to go and watch some in a hospital mortuary, and having been sort of fairly horrified by quite how much like a butcher's shop it is, I wanted to convey that fact. It was so, you know, if the technical detail is for truthful effect, absolutely go there.
Good advice.
Yeah, I think that's exactly true, Matthew. It's all about the story. I mean, in the end, we're telling a story, and using the coroner's or the coroner's office as a vehicle to tell that story. And the technical details are there, I think, two reasons really. For me, for authenticity, firstly, so that we understand, you know, the process the coroner is following, and secondly, in service of the story. You know, often the post-mortem reveals a detail that becomes important in the police investigation later on, or in the coroner's investigation later on. But inevitably, I find when I'm writing, I put all the technical details in at the beginning, and then edit them all out at the end. You know, simply because I can tell the story without having them, you know, or without having too much. And I find as usual that when I find my eyes starting to glaze over as I'm reading my own work, I know
not a good sign.
At least 10 minutes ago, the audience or the reader has already glazed over, passed over them. So time to get out the the was it cat the cut for that particular bit and save it for another book. It goes into the cuts section of my computer, which I'll resurrect in later novels, I'm sure.
Priscilla?
Well, I mean, I agree with the pair of you, actually. But in the end, you know, there is a certain reliance on science. But as we all know, I assume we've all attended postmortems, and I actually have got, with the name blanked out, an actual postmortem report that I can use as a scaffolding, because, you know, when the coroner backs up an opinion or comes to an opinion, it very often is due to the science there. But how many of our readers want to know exactly how much the liver weighs or the heart weighs, or, you know, because we know all the organs are taken out and tested and everything. But you're quite right, it is butcher's slab stuff, but it is done with a great deal of respect, I've found, all the way along. But I was asking a pathologist who's now retired so many questions. He said, Sally, you're going to have to come to a post-mortem. And of course, luckily for me, my husband attended medical school in the days when dissection was very much a part of it. So there's the science and there's the actual thing. But yeah, you're quite right. Even I can feel myself glazing over if I'm, you know, reduced to weighing the heart or the liver, or, you know, sort of reducing the stomach to its contents and then having a good sniff to see if they smell of whiskey. I mean, sometimes it can get a bit disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nicole Johnston has just said that. She said, gosh, that just focused me. I struggled to attend a post-mortem to be able to write about it.
The question is, do you have a breakfast or do you not have a breakfast? You know, is it one you're going to see later?
Yeah, I went to visit a pathologist. I won't say where. I mean, I presume he was quite old school, but he was leaning in the corridor. Actually, it was a very busy time in the hospital, and it was full of bodies, and they haven't got enough space, and the trolleys are all backed up, full of dead bodies. And he was just leaning on one of them, talking to a technician. And then he said, "Oh, have a look at this one," and he would pull back the plastic flap, and then say, "Oh, have a look at this one." And I thought I was going to look at one post-mortem, but I came out having seen about 15 dead bodies and goodness knows what. And it's seared into my mind, and I don't know how anyone can do that job. My wife's uncle was a pathologist. Respect to him for having been able to do it for so many decades.
While we're on the subject of research, what do you do for your research, and are there any experts that you kind of wish you had sort of contact with but don't yet? Because I'm thinking, like, Matthew, you've got a book about flight and issues with aeroplanes and things.
Yeah.
That must have taken quite a lot of research.
Yeah, a lot of research with several pilots and a lot of reading and getting. Yeah, it's about a plane crash for big Airbus A380. So yeah, I learned all about the aircraft, and the walls of the study were smothered with pictures of the cockpit for that year that the book was going on. And I just kept referring back to principally one pilot, currently serving airline pilot, who helped me quite a lot with the technical detail. But yeah, it's important. If you're going to write something technical, you have to go and do the research with people who know about it.
Is there an expert that you haven't met yet that you'd kind of like to have meet one of?
Good question. I've met some. I actually don't find it hard to get people to talk. I mean, actually, people are quite keen to talk to writers. I wrote another book. Actually, it was about gain of function genetic research on a virus. Back in 2012-13, I wrote this book, and I thought, where am I going to find an immunologist? And I just wrote to a couple of university media departments or press departments, and I found several within a day. it seems to me people are quite keen to share their expertise if you go and look for them. I don't know if the others agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, it's been one of the things the local university hospital. I have about 4 consultants who I can just call up and ask them, the cancer or throat conditions. One's an ENT specialist, the cancer specialist. Another is a blood specialist. Another one is brain specialist. Again, my brain has gone dead, so I can't think of the word. But I can just call them up and say, what if I was again doing one thing on somebody who slit their throat. Was it a suicide, or was it somebody who slit someone's throat? And the local, yeah, I know, the blade slipped when I was shaving. The local specialist said quite interestingly, very difficult to slit your throat through suicide. Possible, but very difficult. Simply because the pain is so great after you get to about the midpoint of the throat before you get to the Adam's apple that you actually can't do anything, or you pass out through the pain. So, so therefore it's interesting. It is possible. It's just very, very rare. And so again, that led me onto a complete, new tangent in the book. And I think that research is great for doing that. It gives you actually new stories all the time. And it's one of the problems with research. And I've called it a rabbit hole before, and it is in the coroner system is changing constantly, and it's incumbent on the writer to constantly do research to find out how the changes have affected people and the law, and how that then affects your story. For example, I actually only found out in the last month or so that the whole coroner system has been put in, so I call it the technical, stuffed by the High Court in the last 4 or 5 months on unlawful killings by a judgment in the Morm case, where unlawful killings before used to be done on a criminal burden of proof. I've got to remind myself what that is. Criminal is beyond reasonable doubt. The High Court has now decided that the coroners can decide unlawful killings using the civil burden of proof, which is the balance of probabilities, which changes everything in terms of accidental death at a work site or custodial deaths, police deaths involve the army or in a police station or involve the police, because suddenly that means that a coroner can pronounce that this was an unlawful killing. Before they couldn't, unless they could prove it's beyond reasonable doubt. So research is a constant process. It never stops. But what it does is it constantly leads you to new ideas for new books, which is why I keep doing it, basically.
Oh, yeah. Well, the first thing that was very lucky for me is that I used to work in a GP practice as a practice nurse, and one of my patients was a coroner's officer. The medical people I knew anyway, because I'd known most of them through medical school. So the medical side of it I found easier, but I have to say people used to have a double appointment if they were a policeman or a lawyer or something like that. And in lots of ways, I have to say that the research is an absolute delight. I love it. I've just been researching on classic cars, and you get an enthusiast and you spend a whole afternoon with them, and they're telling you about tracking down people's classic cars that they had in the 1970s and things like that. The research in itself, to me, it's an absolute delight, and it stops your writing from becoming stale, because you get enthused by whatever the person that you're interviewing or the subject of the book. You get really interested, like you in aeroplanes or you in the law and so on, like that. So I think the research keeps you fresh.
So there's a good question from Nicole Johnston here, and something I consider every now and again because I'm a science teacher. She says, do any of you worry about GCHQ following your emails and searches?
Sometimes.
No.
A few watch this on my Amazon purchases in the past.
You know what?
Oh dear.
It crossed my mind a few years ago when I published my 5th book called The Chosen Dead. It was about a meningitis virus which had this gain of function done to it in a laboratory in order then that the immunologist can sort of tackle it with a vaccine. But it was kind of full of that level of technical detail. But a really quite an evil biological weapon had emerged from it that could sort of single out specific ethnic groups. And this was an idea I got actually from a book written by Jeremy Paxman and Robert Harris when he was a Times journalist. They'd written it back in the 80s, and they'd picked up on research that the Americans were doing in the early 70s during the Vietnam War. They were trying to find a biological weapon that would only kill Vietnamese and not Americans. Really spooky stuff. Anyway, so I alluded to that in the book, and I was checking the IP addresses of people that were looking at my website after that, and I did see a lot of government web addresses, but whether they were checking out, I don't know. But I don't think writers of fiction are particularly vulnerable to investigation.
Martin?
Yeah, for me, I don't think it's more the issue of what's on your reading list, which is the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at my reading list at the moment, it's how to poison somebody, it's how to kill them with by slitting their throat. It is what happens when you hang. What are the physiological changes that happen to your body as you're hanging, and these things. I mean, I worry if somebody ever, not necessarily GCHQ, but somebody, heaven forbid I would ever be taken into a hospital, but somebody said, oh, just check what he's been looking at recently, and the police come along, and as they can do without getting a warrant these days, they can check your mobile phones for your search history, and they can check your computer for your search history. And my search history would probably say that I'm a
psychopath.
Psychopath who's interested in methods of death for people, and certainly would raise a few questions about my sanity, if nothing else. Not the nicest search history on earth, but necessary, unfortunately.
Well, I used to think that you just say you're a writer, and that's sort of the perfect excuse for having a morbid obsession with all the sorts of things that we are. But I have to say, when I was nursing, there was one short story that I wrote that I absolutely wouldn't dared have written while I was still nursing, and that was when somebody dies, obviously they have a death certificate, and that death certificate then is the passport to everything else. And I noticed that one of them had been wasted. The doctor had started to write it in, and he'd done it wrongly. And I just imagined if somebody took a razor blade, not to that one, but to the next one in the page, you could actually remove a blank death certificate. And I thought, I'm not going to write that story until I've retired as a nurse, because it just felt a little bit too close to the bone. And that's the trouble, I think, with all of us, is that we can see something that just might have the most awful consequence.
Yeah. Can we answer that question about?
I love the ideas, the passport.
Oh yeah, from Joe. Absolutely. So Joe wants to know what's the funniest or strangest story you can tell us. I feel like Matthew's got a good one since he asked one.
No, I just have to. It's just a tiny anecdote. I just have to say that I went to a coroner's dinner a few years ago, and at the bar afterwards met the retired coroner for Beachy Head, for that area of Sussex, and he just came up, you know, he'd had a few drinks. He said, "The bloody Dutch." I said, "I beg your pardon."
Oops.
And he said they've got no cliffs of their own. They buy a one-way ferry ticket and come and jump off our. And he had about 80 Dutch suicides a year.
Whoa.
Beachy Head. And people even on mobility scooters heading for the edge and all of that. But it was very grim. But you know, he dealt with it with gallows humor. I also met his successor, who didn't look like he was dealing with it that way at all.
Oh, Martin, a funny or strange story you can tell us?
Funny story. Yeah, I think mine was probably I had coffee with a pathologist about a year ago, and we were just chatting, and we finished because we're going through his day. I was just trying to find out what his day was like, what he did all the time. And he gave me 15 minutes for a coffee, and it was great. And then at the end, I asked him, so where are you going tonight? And he said, I'm off to El Gato Neto, which is a Negro, which is a restaurant in Manchester. And he said, yeah, the liver and onions is great. So in my quickly flashing my head, this guy who's been chopping up bodies, weighing livers, weighing brains all day long, and he's going out because his favourite meal is liver and onions. Wonderful,
Well, I've got two stories. The first, I have to say, does involve liver and onions. My husband was in the doctor's mess where in those days, you had a little silver bell and you just ring it. And he said this liver didn't taste very good. So he sent it off for histology and it came back as a malignancy. And after that, if ever liver was on the menu, he absolutely bypassed it. The second little story shows me in a very bad light, I'm afraid. It's rather embarrassing. Obviously as a writer, if a newspaper reporter comes up and wants to talk about your book, you think, oh yeah, column inches, sales, you think, oh, fame at last, like that. So one of the times that I attended Coroner's Court with my husband, it was a tacky case and it was very unpleasant, and allegations were against my husband, who was able to sort of prove that this particular prescription was nothing to him. Outside, a newspaper reporter was standing, complete with a microphone and a camera, with a sort of long lens and everything. He goes, well, doctor, he goes, can we say a quote? And my husband was so incensed at this whole thing that he goes, yes, just F off. And it was the very same reporter who a week before I'd been begging to put me on the front page because I had another title come out, and I just sort of shrank and went into the car, and I felt so embarrassed.
This is not a funny story, it's anything but funny, but it's just interesting. A friend of mine was a deputy coroner, and he had a case in North London where someone had been missing for over 7 years. So then they're presumed to be statutorily dead, and they were a New Zealand national in Britain working. And during the course of the inquest, they actually figured out what had happened to him, that he was working in a kind of scrapyard in North London where they dispose of fridges and washing machines and various things. And there's something like a pit in the ground with a great big thing in the middle that spins round with chains coming off it, and you drop the washing machine in and it gets shredded up into tiny bits of metal.
Ooh,
and I think he went in there.
This.
And was never found. And the fact, they thought he'd just disappeared, but in fact he'd gone into this hideous machinery. Anyway, but if you want to dispose of a body, I recommend that.
Can I just answer, I think it's Nicola's question. Nicola Monaghan. She says, have I written the story? Yes, I have. It's a sort of novella, and it's called The Certificate. but as I say, I didn't dare do it while I was still nursing. I would have probably ended up in big trouble. The Royal College would have been very unimpressed with me.
There's another, I like this question that's come up on the stream. It says, over here in Norway, so I'm presuming this is Hugo who messaged earlier, we have a debate about what is too much gore and or violence in crime novels. What do you think about the importance of writing descriptive details, for example, from the coroner's findings? What's enough and what is too much?
Well, that's a matter of taste and context, isn't it? I think that you know, the moment that you're tipping over into trying to titillate readers by the details that you're presenting, you've crossed the line. I think that's how I draw the line myself. Just enough to tell the story. I mean, normally in stories about coroners, you're trying to, you're not writing about violence. You're writing about the search for truth, and you're writing about tragedy, and you're trying to convey that. You're trying to sort of bring some healing to a situation. Is how I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree, Matthew. I think that's the stories that I write are really about a quest for truth. You know, it's this journey that Ridpath goes on throughout every novel, where he starts with an issue and ends up with a form of the truth, whether that's the real truth or something he's found out or not. It doesn't matter what it does. The physical details of a murder or a death are an adjunct to the story. They're not the story itself. And I think, as Matthew said, if I have to decide in each novel how much detail I give that gives me the story and gives me the horror of the story without titillating or going into some sort of enjoyment for people watching it. It shouldn't be enjoying, and so it shouldn't be joyful. In my point of view, violence is horrific and horrible. If I write about it, it's going to be horrific and horrible, but it's not there to titillate. One of my own personal beefs is Quentin Tarantino, who I think always portrays violence as somehow some sort of dance or some music or something that's cool, and it isn't. It's ugly and bloody and violent, and death is not something that we should write about to titillate people. It's there as part of our story. That's all.
Yeah, what I tend to remember is that when I was sitting in the coroner's court, listening to this very graphic detail about what happened, is in front of me were the relatives sitting there, and everything that was said in the coroner's court, they're sitting there listening, they're picturing that happening to their loved one. And in this particular case, they actually played the police tapes, and this young woman who had been a witness to all this sat there, and I could see her just shrinking and crying. I mean, it's a matter of great emotion. And to be honest, I don't really enjoy, you'll be delighted to know that as a nurse, I didn't like to see pain. I mean, if you can put somebody under a general anaesthetic, then there's no need. There's plenty of drugs. So, you know, if I'm writing something, I can actually feel how it would feel. It's very painful. You're so right. You know, that violence is horrible. You know, I can remember, I mean, this is nothing to do with anything, but I can remember watching a rugby match in my days when I was a bit more interested in rugby. And I thought I misheard what the umpire had said, or the commentator. And I thought he said, oh, he's going to have a cup of tea. And what he'd actually said is, oh, he's lost a couple of teeth, you know. And I sort of thought, oh, that's absolutely horrible. You know, it would be really painful, really unpleasant. So I just don't enjoy writing the gore, or anybody who's trapped or, you know, being tortured. I just would find it so unpleasant to write. I have to say, to read, if it's well written, well enough written, that I tend to sort of slip away from it. I'm a coward. I'm a coward.
I was being distracted by the absolute sheer amount of rain that is just hitting the window behind me.
Yep.
Oh, right.
It's been raining.
Yorkshire rain, is it?
Yeah, I live in West Yorkshire. It's absolutely hammering it down. It's been raining all the way through our panel, but it's just got really loud. So if anyone can hear it, where I am. What's the weather like where you all are?
Well,
It's raining in Herefordshire.
yeah, it's raining in Staffordshire. What actually is bothering me more is I've got on the edge of my property an absolutely huge elm tree, ash tree, which has got ash dieback, and I've been away for the weekend and it had dropped a branch, you know, right across the garden, and they say high winds tonight. So if you read my epitaph, say I saw it in the cards, you know, that this ash dieback was about to attack me.
Martin?
I'm afraid it's 28 degrees and sunny here. I'm in a t-shirt, and if you notice above me is an aircon. So
There we go.
slightly different.
Yeah.
That makes us all feel better for living with with the rain hammering down. So before we went live, Sheila's other question, and I know a lot of you you all write about coroners, but you kind of write other things as well. She wants to know about what inspired you to write crime fiction. And I'm going to add to that, would you write in other genres?
Shall I let someone else go first this time?
You're thinking, shall we start with Priscilla and give her a chance to go first?
Oh, right. Okay. I'll go first then. Well, why did I write crime fiction? Because I enjoyed reading crime fiction. I found that it was, it just interested me. I did try and write a romance, which ended up getting published, but I had to sort of wrap it up as a rather weak crime novel. So any people who were fans of my work sort of slated it, and I don't think it particularly worked as a romance. But anyway, it was a good thing to try and write. I did find out actually, which is I think a little bit spooky and odd. I'm adopted, and I've always known I was adopted because I'm one of 7 adopted children. In fact, my 2 brothers are in the room roasting a chicken as I speak. So we're quite a close family, but 7 disparate
hopefully over a fire.
Grown up now. And I found out when my mum was writing her memoirs something that I'd never known before, and that was that my real blood grandfather was a policeman. So one might say it was in my DNA. So the cross between medicine and the law I find really interesting. So yeah, I went first.
You also wrote a really you haven't mentioned your children's book. So
I haven't mentioned my children's book.
Priscilla's books longer than anyone else's because she wrote a children's book and I went to school in the Midlands. So I'm fairly sure she came to visit my primary school.
I think it very likely. Well, I'd actually written the romance stroke weak crime novel before that, but I wasn't getting published. And then I met someone from the National Trust Gardens at Biddulph Grange, which is sort of divided into different countries, and it sparked me off. So as I had young children at the time, I wrote the children's book. And in fact, if I look to my right, I've framed the covers of Mr. Bateman's Garden, but that is available as an ebook. It should be available as a print on demand, but I haven't quite mastered the technology. That came out in, I think, 87.
Nice.
Not when I was 87, 1987.
Martin?
Yeah, I write again. Probably the same. I read an awful lot of crime novels. My degree's in history, so I actually started writing historical crime, and then always thought I could never write contemporary crime because I thought I needed the history to hang a story on, and then discovered through research that I didn't, that I could actually write contemporary crime in Manchester. And actually, I'm one of these people who believe that some of the best writing at the moment is done in the crime genre. When I look at books by Ian Rankin or Val McDermott
Yep.
or Belinda Bauer. I'm amazed at the quality of the writing and the way that the genre in the news word has developed in the last 20 years to actually go more from simply the old style solving a mystery into examining societal conflict, examining philosophical ideas, examining difference in society and difference in class and in war through the prism of a crime. And because of that, I think we're suddenly seeing crime novels winning the Booker Prize, which has happened a couple of times in the last 5 years. And again, I'm trying to think of the novels, but they did exist. And I think this is the way that crime and crime writing will develop in the next 10 years, to go from being genre to actually what I think it is, which is mainstream.
Matthew?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I started writing legal thrillers, because I started out life in the law. So I wrote legal thrillers, which then become bracketed under the crime genre. But most of my work's been writing television drama, and television drama likes crime. You'll see that medical shows and crime shows dominate, because they lend themselves dramatically to exploring a mystery and to asking all the big questions of life and death and to looking in the darker places in the psyche. And it's actually quite hard to pitch in television something which is purely a character-based story. And I think that's what's happening in prose fiction, that somehow we're very used to these genres and we feel comforted by that. And if we know that it's going to be a crime story, then we're quite prepared to explore all sorts of other things through it. But the nature of crime stories has changed enormously as well, in that it's not always about detectives or coroners solving a crime. Often stories are told from the point of view of criminals, because what we're really doing is exploring the darker recesses of our own psyches through these stories. So yeah, I'm open. I'm about to start another book, which is fundamentally a ghost story, not a crime story at all. So I'm trying to break free.
I like ghost stories.
I'd like to ask Matthew, actually, if I can. How do you find the? I mean, I used to work for my pens in advertising, so quite often I used to have to write 30-second TV commercials to tell a story in 30 seconds. How do you find the difference between screenwriting and novel writing? Is it easy to switch, or how do you find?
They're two very different disciplines. I mean, drama on the screen, you have to construct a story with many layers and then try and tell it as simply as you possibly can in as few words as you possibly can. So it's a process of distillation. In some ways I find it harder, because it's that distilling down and down and down. But the essential difference is that you write a television script. First of all, you have to sell it up front, then you write it, and then you've got a team of people giving you notes, and half the job is responding to and mediating the notes that are coming at you from all directions, which is a very different experience from writing a book, which is you satisfying yourself and a direct relationship with readers. So ultimately, writing a book is the more creatively satisfying experience, is my view.
Good answer. So Nicola Monaghan's commented a few times. Apparently it's raining. Oh well, she's in the Midlands as well, which is nice.
It's raining everywhere, apparently.
It's raining everywhere
except Taiwan.
Except where I am, of course.
Yeah. She says she writes about DNA in her novels, so that's very interesting to her. Me too, Nicola. I studied DNA, so
right.
I have to have a look. That sounds fascinating. So I have a question that I like to ask, and as I'm sat here with three of mine, I'm going to ask it. So I ask people who their shut up and take my money authors are. It's my phrase for it. So the people who you will just buy, no matter what their book is about, you just buy it because it's got their name on it. And I'm, like I said, I'm sat here with 3 of mine. I would consider you all in that. That's the reason why I never have any money, because I've got so many. So who are yours?
Well, I don't even have to think. It just spills off my tongue. Mick Herron, I absolutely love his work. I mean, it's the jokes, the political incorrectness, the spoof spy thing. I love that Slough House series. Is my, I just pre-order them on Amazon, I'm afraid, but I pre-order them. I just can't resist them.
For me, Michael Connolly, a man who's been writing since 1992.
Yeah.
The same character, Bosch, and it's still fresh, and it's still good, and it's still well written, and it's still one of those which I'll buy it and I'll try and read it the same day I buy it, and it's bloody annoying. But, I mean, even though I've got about half the books in paperback, I saw he had a box set of paperbacks, and I'm tempted to buy the whole box set to get the paperbacks I'm missing at the moment, which is very stupid. The others I'd always read, actually, is somebody who I think is tremendously underrated, is a writer called Belinda Bauer, who, quite often writes in exactly the genre we're working, but always, for me, appears fresh and original and new, and I'm always surprised by her writing. She did a great book, again I forget titles, about anatomy, and a hospital, which was a wonderful read. And I think for me, she's probably the second one I'll always buy her books, simply to see how is she tackling something new again. Does it so well.
Thank you so much for that. I've just written her name down. Thank you.
Yeah, she's got a great series, If you, there's one about a nurse.
She's very nice.
Does she?
Yeah.
And who are your ones then, Matthew?
Just glancing at my shelves here. I love legal thrillers. They're my first love. So Michael Connolly was definitely on the list. I read all of John Grisham's books. Sometimes, he's under great pressure to keep turning them out, but every other one is still very good, and he has this sort of very comforting style of storytelling which I find intriguing. Somehow I feel very relaxed when I read the first couple of pages. There's an American writer called James Lee Burke who writes his stories down in Louisiana. I love him because I love his descriptive powers and his kind of evil characters that he conjures. And because because I'm a screenwriter as well, Elmore Leonard was one of the first crime writers that I properly encountered and really learned a lot from, because he's really boiled down, every single word counts. And what I really admire about him is that he was writing still fresh and contemporary crime thrillers into his 90s until he died. And I just think, well, if I've got one ambition in life, it's to keep going like he did.
Thank you. We've got a lot of comments about that. I think a few people are saying they like Belinda Bauer's books as well. Sam says it's raining in Manchester, but that's not news. It's always raining in Manchester.
There's a joke in Manchester about if you can see the Pennines, it's going to rain, and if you can't see the Pennines, it's already raining.
Yeah, good comment.
Yeah.
And if you're in Manchester and you can see the Pennines, you're on the wrong side of them. So we've only got about a minute left. Do you want to finish us off with a reminder just about yourselves and your books? I know Sam's posted the Amazon links to all of your books further up the comments for everyone who's watching as well.
Well, I've got a naughty standalone coming out at the end of May that while I wrote it, I was absolutely convinced nobody would publish. So it comes out at the end of May, and I'm as shocked as everybody else. It's called The Subsequent Wife.
Nice.
I had aside from my Coroners.
I've written.
Sorry, Mike, you go ahead. Sorry.
After you. Oh, sorry. I've written 6 of the Thomas Ridpath books at the moment. The 7th, I think, comes out in late September. And I just, my favourite idea, I think, from writing the Coroners books actually comes from the Coroner's Office website. And what the Coroner's Office website, what it says is that the coroners are advocates for the dead to safeguard the living.
Yeah. Good.
And I couldn't put it as a better way of describing the sort of novels I hope to write.
Good.
And even if I don't actually get there, at least I'm aiming for that sort of effect.
I've written my 7-8 books in the Jenny Cooper Coroner series. I hope to revisit her sometime soon. During lockdown, I published a standalone thriller called The Black Art of Killing, which is a sort of action thriller, but hopefully quite a thoughtful one. Terrible time to publish a book, but hopefully it will be out in the bookshops now. Yes, I will write another coroner book, but I'm also going to explore other avenues in future, I think.
Yeah. And I've just read it's snowing in Norway. Which is
Yeah.
great to hear.
So let's be grateful.
So we've got rain, but it's snowing in Norway.
Not in Jersey, where we go on holiday for a couple of days every year.
Yeah, Jersey's wonderful.
I think we all need to go to Jersey from the sound of things. All that's left for me to say is thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
and
you
bye.
Very much indeed.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Nice to meet you.